Do you remember those licensed Nickelodeon games? And I'm not talking about the ones we're all familiar with, like Battle for Bikini Bottom. I'm talking about whatever this is.
The 2000s were a crazy time for licensed games. If there was some intellectual property, there was probably a game of it, and Nickelodeon was one of the most notorious companies to abide by this practice. While they did provide us with some genuinely great games, they also pushed out a lot of stuff that just doesn't get talked about. I want to take a look at some of Nickelodeon's lesser-known titles and determine if they're underrated or deserve to be left in the dust. Starting with our first game. If you watched my video where I replayed some games from my childhood, you'd know that I played a little game called SpongeBob SquarePants Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. That game was basically a repetitive collectathon that provided very little direction of where to go and was honestly just pretty boring. Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius is that, but worse. I never played this game as a kid, so I had no clue what to expect going in. Starting the game, we begin the first level where this kid, Nick, tells us to be useful and win some prizes in the amusement park. After that, we're just sort of let loose to figure things out ourselves. There are no controls overview, no tutorial, nothing. I run around collecting electrons while the advanced water physics turn my game into a slideshow. I'm not sure what purpose collecting the electrons serve, but it's called a collectible, so of course I have to collect them. Why else would the word table be in there? I jump aboard a minecart roller coaster and get thrown into another zone where I have to collect some more stuff. Because the game doesn't tell you how to do anything, I ran up to Goddard smashing every button trying to figure out how to interact with him. Eventually, he turned into a pogo stick, which let me collect the electrons I wasn't able to reach. After I collect everything in this area, I talk to this person to go into the first part of the park. Here, there's a set of mini-games along the back walls that you can play. The first one I go to is this rocket ship side-scroller game, which was way harder than it should be. It's basically just 3 minutes of sitting here completely bored, collecting power-ups before getting put up against the final boss. Then, the boss shoots lasers that are nearly impossible to dodge while doing massive damage. This game was insanely frustrating. I discovered that if you spam the shoot button, you can fire as fast as you can mash the button, opposed to the painstakingly slow fire rate of just holding it down. It also took me way too long to figure out that this little Goddard icon that pops up is a special screen wipe ability. But can you blame me? It literally tells you this absolutely nowhere! After a few more attempts with this newfound knowledge and accelerating my inevitable carpal tunnel, I finally beat the boss. It rewards you with nothing.
Well, that was a waste of time and ligaments.
I collect the actual prizes from the other minigames. The rocket from this other rocket, and the fish from this baseball minigame. I don't quite understand how that one makes sense. After that, I head back to go to the next part of the park. The next park area is pretty straightforward. You just run into this room and go down a very annoying to control slide. I get down the slide, collect the snake, and black screen. Wait, black screen?
Oh my god.
We're playing on a PlayStation 2, so there's no autosave. Luckily, I wasn't too far in, so I quickly made it back to where I was and continued on. I did a fetch quest for Cindy. Fetch quest? Because it's a dog? Before she opened the door for me. This section was fairly straightforward. It's basically just a nauseating 3D platforming section across these magic carpets. Once I'm done here, I find Carl's inhaler to open the next area.
Well, I kinda changed my mind. Why don't you go without me?
I've heard people on YouTube do song covers in a much better Carl impression than whoever voice acted Carl in this game.
The next zone is again pretty straightforward, albeit a bit unsettling. I navigate through this toothy maze, collect the dentures, and move to the final area. This area is the shortest of all of these sub-areas, being a really simple platforming section across the lava. After collecting the last prize, I proceed to the exit. This game is absolutely brain-numbing, but I will say that I like that they included the time it took to complete the stage at the end. I'd imagine this is probably nice for speedrunners, except for one major issue. Who the hell would want to speedrun this game? I'm so sorry. I was curious to see if the other stages offer anything different in terms of gameplay. They don't, but at least the second stage was a lot shorter. We start out in Jimmy's lab where we have to collect parts of the rocket to go to space to stop the aliens that abducted all of our parents. This level adds enemies. They do basically nothing, but at least I get to press 3 buttons now instead of 2. I made my way through this weird side-scroller platformer section in an anthill and collected the first part. I figured out you could jump into the rocket and... oh no. In case you were wondering, yes, I did beat this minigame too. Am I proud of myself? No! So I made my way outside. Here we are confronted with the alien enemies. They kinda just float around and have one attack that's really easy to avoid. After collecting all of the stuff out here and inside the house, I returned to the lab. And that's the whole level. Like I said, this one was a lot shorter than the first level. Even though I was falling asleep playing this game, the second stage was short and I was interested to see what the third stage looked like, so I made my way to it. The level design here was actually pretty neat, but overall it's still the same boring game. I'm just gonna slide this into D tier.
Rocket Power Beach Bandits. I've played this game.
I genuinely do not remember this game whatsoever. Now that I think about it, I barely even remember the actual cartoon. Apparently I liked it enough for my mother to get me this game though, because this is my original copy from 2002. I started the game and was greeted first by a menu to create a save file. Sometimes I forget that games used to have these save file systems that you could give custom names to. Some games, the file name would actually have an effect on gameplay, such as being the name of your character. But other games like this one, I never understood what the purpose of custom names were. Either way, I named my file M for... Upon actually playing the game, I'm immediately blown away by the voice acting. And not because it's good. I kind of zoned out during the cutscene, but I believe the premise is the kids are on summer vacation and... Nope, nuh-uh, nope, don't do that, please! Anyways, someone else stole the sand from the beach, so the gang isn't able to go surfing. They decide to investigate and find a development company that seems to be exploiting their town, sucking it dry of resources for their own capital gain. The whole story revolves around trying to stop this evil corporation. Enough of the boring stuff though. How does the game play? It doesn't. I'll be honest, I'm really struggling to say anything good about the game. I started out just following the objective, which sort of introduces you to the vehicles in the game and also throws some mini-games into the mix. Some of the mini-games can be moderately fun, but many of them are a bit of a slog. The vehicles in this game are extremely clunky as well. It obviously tries to copy Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but it's infinitely jankier while also somehow not having as much depth. The time between minigames is also absurd. A lot of time is spent running between objectives and watching terribly written and acted cutscenes before eventually hitting a minigame. Another major gripe I have with this game is its maps. The map is large and lifeless, which is somewhat understandable for a game made in 2002, but there's just nothing to do! There's so much space, but no real reason to explore aside from the occasional coin you have to collect, but that's part of the main objective. You can traverse the map quite a bit faster using the clunky vehicles, which the game never tells you. The lack of tutorials is simply astonishing. It's almost like these old games expected you to read the game manuals before playing. I ended up getting stuck in the skate park before I found out that you could equip your skateboard from the pause menu. I played until I made it to the second zone just to see if it was any different, and it kind of is. I mean, there's actual combat. It's a loose definition of combat. You can press square to shoot hockey pucks at these pretty unthreatening Roombas that infinitely spawn from these yellow dinner plates around the map. Similar to the last game, I can now press another button, but it sure doesn't make the game any more enjoyable. There's definitely less cutscenes in this area, which really highlights how bland the gameplay actually is. It's just so linear, platforming and combat is extremely basic, and the minigames get repetitive very quickly. I genuinely could not bear to keep playing. I'm really sorry if this was anyone's favorite game growing up. Maybe let me know in the comments why, and I hope you get the help you need. This one's an F tier. The next game on the list is Fairly OddParents Breakin the Rules.
I looked everywhere for this game and couldn't find it, but trust me, I did own it.
On Game Boy. If you recall back in the day, a lot of children's games were released both on home consoles as well as handhelds like the Game Boy or Nintendo DS. However, due to technical limitations, the handheld versions were always extremely dumbed down or even different games entirely. The Game Boy version of this game was basically a 2D side-scrolling shooter, which, while a decent enough game, is completely different from the version we will be looking at today. The PS2 version is a 3D platformer that I also played, but don't really remember at all aside from the art style. I'm pretty sure it was something I ended up renting from Blockbuster, but I never actually owned the console version. Anyways, enough of the yapping, let's take a look at the game. The story starts out with Timmy Turner breaking the rules,
No shit!
which causes a disturbance in the Force. Due to some weird way the rules of magic are set, Timmy's babysitter Vicky gains wish powers due to being the next person to touch the rulebook after Timmy broke the rules. So Cosmo and Wanda are tried in Fairy Court and told they have 49.5 hours to reclaim the rules or else they face being decommissioned.
Like I'm watching Dumb and Dumber. Huh? Right? Don't you love it?
Let's try to figure out which one is Jim Carrey.
However, their powers are taken away, so they can't make wishes unless we collect stars for them. I guess 2003 is the year when tutorials were finally invented, because this game drops us right into one. It goes over the basic movement as well as the core collecting mechanic. It's short, sweet, and to the point, and I really appreciate it. One thing I don't appreciate, however, is the frame rate. This game is capped at 30 FPS, which is really painful for my spoiled PC gamer eyes. In all fairness, most games at the time still played at 30 FPS. Games like Sly Cooper or Jak and Daxter were the exception, not the rule. Regardless, something about this game just feels really clunky. After the tutorial, we're dropped right into Timmy's house, which serves as this game's hub area where you can select which levels to go into. This gives me flashbacks to the Cat in the Hat game I played a few videos ago, except not creepy. The art style in this game is actually really good. It perfectly encapsulates the cartoon style in a three-dimensional environment. Another thing I like is that each level is a reference to some episode of the TV show. The first stage I load into is Timmy's video game console. This level is visually really cool. It introduces a Mega Man style gun mechanic which we use to shoot these flying monkey enemies. Aside from that, the level is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of platforming and collecting, and a few times throughout the level there are some gimmicks thrown in that I actually was not the biggest fan of. This airboat part was okay, but it was very unresponsive, and this snowplow section was just tedious. After getting through the level, we're met with a final boss fight. This fight was decent enough. It was pretty easy at first, but if you don't hit the weak spot right after it opens, dodging the lightning is actually kind of challenging. For a children's game, I think this is serviceable. The second level I enter has me in the comic book world of the Crimson Chin. I was expecting more of the same, but this level actually shook things up a little. Instead of being a fairly linear platforming stage, we have branching areas that each have their own mechanic and own little boss fights. The first one is this helicopter section where you cut the bombs off of the ropes. I also hope to never see this propeller protrude from this butt chin ever again. The second section is more platforming and button pressing that we're already familiar with, but now we have a boomerang to deal with enemies, which seems to be particularly made for the boss in this section. The third and final section gives us a grapple hook and tasks us with grappling between rooftops, with the final boss having us grapple the enemy's helicopter and pull it down. This collection of different minigames kind of reminded me of how the Sly Cooper games operate, and while it was pretty simple, it was still a nice change of pace. The third stage sees Timmy getting shrunk to the size of a germ and falling down a bathroom drain. This level is very platforming heavy, which wasn't anything too special, but did add some neat platforming mechanics. While this level adds bouncy platforms as well as tilting platforms, the mechanics that really made this level stand apart you find later. First is this tightrope walking mechanic. While a nice change of pace, it's not a nice mechanic. It was actually kind of frustrating keeping balance, and admittedly, I fell off the rope multiple times. The other mechanic near the end of the level was much more fun though. We gain a super jump, but it's only active when the pressure is being sucked out of the drain. So we have to keep an eye on these germ bubbles and time our jumps with the bubbles rising to utilize the super jump. After super jumping out of the tub, we come across the final boss, which simply has us shooting soap into the mouth of the king or queen, we don't discriminate here, germ. This was the last level I played, not because I was getting bored, but because I have a lot more games to cover. Overall, this game is decent enough. It actually tries to innovate every level, so the game never feels stale, although it doesn't quite hit the mark every time. The game has a bit of a clunkiness to it. I don't know if it's the frame rate or the physics engine, but it does detract from the experience a bit. Otherwise, it's an okay game and boasts a great art style. I think this game is worthy of being put into a low B tier. Even though I wasn't the biggest PC gamer growing up, I did have a family laptop that my mom would occasionally get me games for. One of the most memorable ones was SpongeBob SquarePants Employee of the Month, which my last video is exclusively about, but right now we're going to talk about a different Nickelodeon game, CatDog Quest for the Golden Fire Hydrant. I remember adoring this show, but the game I have basically no recollection of other than it exists. I name my file Blort and am given a choice between arcade or adventure mode. Both of these are effectively the same collection of minigames, except adventure mode comes with a story and some cutscenes, so of course we're going to go with that one. The story is pretty self-explanatory. We're going on a quest to find the Golden Fire Hydrant. Who would have guessed? I also never really thought about it until now, but how do they poop? Anyways, the first minigame is this little platforming game where we have to jump around collecting paper scraps to form a coupon that we're supposed to send in or whatever to get the fire hydrant. This game is pretty basic. There's not much of a penalty to getting hit, and you just kind of wait around for the paper to fall. After this, we end up sledding down a mountain. I accidentally fat-fingered the spacebar and skipped the cutscenes, so I don't know how we got here, but holy shit is this minigame bad. I've never gotten motion sick before, but I think I might be now. This minigame is super easy, it just makes me want to throw up and feels like it goes on forever. After getting to the bottom of the mountain, we exchange the coupon for a map that tells us to climb the nearby mountain. So that's where the next minigame takes place. This game is not very fun and sometimes difficult in a way that just feels impossible. Luckily, there's not really any penalty to failing, not that I would know because why would I ever fail at a children's game? Once at the top, the mountain tells us to find the hydrant at the taco shop, but before we can head there, we're abducted by aliens. This minigame is definitely the most creative, but also the most headache-inducing. It is a 3D shooter, but with a 2D perspective, and combined with the low frame rate, feels like playing Doom on Microsoft PowerPoint. We have to collect these cereal boxes to fuel our lasers and shoot down alien ships to reclaim spaceship parts. Once we have all the spaceship parts, we're beamed down to the taco shop. We become enslaved and have to now deliver tacos to the boss. This is probably the most enjoyable minigame. We're basically playing a game of capture the flag, but with tacos. After this, we're given access to the VIP room, but still no golden hydrant. We find a clue in the bathroom stall and fall down the toilet into a sewer tomb thing. Here, we're thrown into a 2D platformer minigame where we have to dodge mummies and just make it through the levels. After getting through all the levels, of which there were only 2, we make it to the golden hydrant. And that's it. Yeah, this is one of those games that you pop in to entertain yourself for a few minutes when you don't know what else to do as a child.
I beat this game in under 20 minutes, and I still feel like I wasted my time. If my mom spent any more than 50 cents on this game back in the day, she made what we call a poor financial decision.
This one's going into F tier. Tak and the Power of Juju was actually a video game before it became a TV show. This game was released in 2003, with the show not debuting until 2007. I never watched the show and honestly didn't even know it existed, but I did play this game as a kid. The intro to this game is, well, an intro. It starts off with a fourth wall break, giving us some exposition on the story. Basically, good girl, bad guy steals power and turns village into sheep. We have to help the village.
I waste time, say lot word when few word do trick.
After the intro cutscene, we're thrown right into the tutorial, where we are being guided by a Navi-style character. The tutorial goes over the basic movement and combat mechanics, as well as goes over the different environmental tools that we'll be using throughout the game. We're also introduced to these feathers that we have to collect and are told it's our mana pool that we'll need later, so I make sure to collect as many as possible. After the tutorial, we're introduced to the hub area and led to the next level. In this level, we're first tasked with bringing 4 golden teeth back to these statues before we can open the door and wake up a dead shaman. He gives us his stick, which not only can we use to smack things better, but also lets us do a high jump. So I jump out of the tomb and we're introduced to these little plant mini-bosses. I run around and fight all 3 of them that are in this area, and this is when the gameplay loop of this game clicked with me. This game is your typical 3D platformer with hub worlds and multiple branching levels, However, unlike most 3D platformers where your goal is to rack up some sort of collectibles, this game tasks you with objectives that eventually result in you gaining new power-ups to advance the story. It manages to somewhat change the formula of 3D platformers into more of a Metroidvania style, but I'm not quite sure I'm sold on it. Despite not being sold on the game design, the next level started to warm me up to it. The game introduces a few new mechanics like utilizing the sheep, a blow dart that adds more variety to the puzzles, and it starts to ease you into the game without holding your hand as much. The level design is a bit more interesting despite having the same jungle aesthetic. There were a few puzzles that actually made me think and experiment without the game outright telling me what to do, which actually kept me engaged. An example of this is this puzzle where you have to shoot this monkey so it throws a coconut at the gorilla, then the gorilla gets angry and throws the monkey into the other tree, so you get the monkey to throw another coconut which lures the gorilla to the other tree so you can finally get launched to the next platform. That makes sense? Anyways, I beat up a few more plants, then returned to the hub with my new blowgun. This allows me to shoot this monkey, which breaks open a crate for me, revealing a rhino that I can use to smash a few barricades and get to the next level. I have a choice between 2 stages and end up going to the canyon. The scenery is a refreshing change from the jungle aesthetic, which I like. I beat up 3 more plants to get the last 3 flowers I need to bring to the village elder so he can perform his spell. After casting the spell on the wrong sheep, we're tasked with fetching the spirit rattle. This throws us into our first boss fight, which is just a stupidly easy dodgeball fight, and when we come back with the rattle, we find that the brave warrior that we thought was the sheep is actually flattened. So we're asked to find the spirit of the warrior to resurrect him. At this point, the game opens up a lot. It introduces a bunch of new collectibles to go fetch, including new power-ups and upgrades, which actually resolves one of my biggest gripes with the game. I felt like early on there was no reason to explore, but now the amount of exploration that opens up is actually kind of overwhelming. There's these orbs which you have to collect 100 of, tikis that unlock new areas, and tokens that give you magic powers and finally make use of the mana system. These collectibles are also added to zones we've already visited, meaning we now have an incentive to go back and explore everything that previously felt empty or linear. I collect a few things in the village hub area before backtracking to the first stage to activate the tiki. This opens up a hedge maze with an extremely tedious puzzle. Here, we have to lure 4 mummies from their tombs to the central tomb. Each tomb has their own unique puzzles, with some of them being kind of fun and some of them being very frustrating. If you enjoy escort missions and enjoy lava levels, you're a psychopath, but you'll really like this puzzle. I spent almost an hour in this area before I completed the puzzle, which I didn't realize was the entrance to the spirit world. I did a bit of the puzzle in the spirit world before deciding that I played enough and called it quits. I think the game has a lot of potential, and I'm afraid to make an incorrect judgment here since I only played a few hours. The platforming and combat are pretty clunky and the game starts out slow, but luckily most of the game revolves around environmental puzzles, and for better or worse, it isn't afraid to experiment with different unique mechanics. I wasn't sold on it in the beginning, but by the end of my play session, I was actually enjoying myself. Despite the tedious parts, I found myself wondering what new puzzle or mechanic was around the corner. I think the game is worthy of a high B tier, and I can even see an argument for low A tier depending on how the rest of the game plays. Nickelodeon has their own form of mashup games in the form of the Nicktoons series. Similar to Nintendo creating games like Mario Kart and Smash Bros, Nicktoons had their own brawler and kart racers too. They also had, whatever the fuck this is, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island is a top-down action beat-em-up game that was released in 2005. This game has you team up with a bunch of Nickelodeon characters and commit acts of animal cruelty. One of the highlights of this game was being able to play co-op, and I remember occasionally playing through these games with my brother when I was younger. The first level starts out as a pretty basic tutorial. You run around, beat up monsters, and collect things. The combat is extremely basic and uninteresting. Each character has a basic attack, a special attack, and a ground attack. There's no combos, no abilities you can upgrade, just 2 buttons to mash. Enemies are also a complete joke. They are barely able to hit you if you just spam attacks while they come at you, and even if they do hit you, they do like no damage until much later in the game. After going over the basics, we collect some stuff and head into the next level. Each level, at least early on, generally introduces some new character to play as. It doesn't really matter much, but each character does have their own special attacks, which I guess adds some variety. At this point, anything is better than listening to SpongeBob yell in my ear constantly.
How does he do that? Oh, it's a crab thing.
The second level is a lot less handholdy, and exploring in this game is actually decently enjoyable. There are secret items you can find in each level, and when you collect all the items in the set, you can unlock bonus features and extra stages. This stage also introduces different currencies to collect. Each character has a bonus costume that you can unlock by collecting a certain amount of their corresponding currency. This system is okay. Certain levels contain specific currencies, so you're not able to get everything just by playing any level. I can't help but think this was an attempt to pad out playtime by forcing players to grind previous levels, which, realistically, who is going to do that? The end of this level has us fighting some birds to rescue Danny Phantom's friend before introducing us to the hub area. There's nothing that crazy about the hub. As you continue to collect currencies, beat stages, and rescue Nickelodeon characters, this camp expands with new buildings, some of which I believe provide bonus features. I'm not quite sure, as I didn't get far enough to really build up the camp. I played the next few levels, but there's really not much to say. The game gets marginally more difficult, but not any more fun. The level design gets a bit more interesting, but nothing that makes me go,
Wow! I need to go out and buy Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island right now!
After a few more levels, I decided to try out one of the bonus levels I unlocked. I mean, at least it's something different. This game is like the Lego games, but without the puzzles and charming cutscenes that make those games at least somewhat interesting. It's overall not the worst game I've ever played, it's just painfully mediocre. I'd say this one belongs in the C tier.
I couldn't make a Nickelodeon video without talking about at least one SpongeBob game, now could I?
SpongeBob SquarePants Supersponge. This was a 2D platformer made for the PlayStation 1, and I believe the only PS1 game I ever owned. Now, I didn't actually own a PS1. PlayStation 2 was backwards compatible with most PS1 games, and this was one of them. Just looking at the game, it looks like your typical 2D platformer. Playing the game, on the other hand, plays like your typically bad 2D platformer. I always see people talk about how much they despise this game, and I'm always confused since I remember having fond memories of this game.
I should have just left it that way.
I won't go over the story because, I mean, who cares? SpongeBob is an amputee or something. The game starts out fine. The first level is a breeze, your typical introductory level to any 2D platformer. The controls are a little clunky, but overall, it was okay. We're introduced to the jellyfishing net as a weapon, and you can also apparently butt slam. The game doesn't tell you that, I just found out due to the game's jank causing me to do it by accident. After this level, I noticed a little bonus level that has you collecting shinies within a limited time. It doesn't really matter if you don't collect all of the shinies within the time limit, because you can just replay the same level as much as you want and only need to collect the ones you missed. If this is the case, what is the point of the timer? After beating the level, you're thrown into a shop where you can spend the shinies on items. What do the items do?
I don't know.
I moved on to the second stage, and why is this so damn difficult? This is just the second stage in the first world of 4, and already it feels like the Dark Souls of 2D platformers. The second stage is basically that streamer game only up. If you miss a jump, which is super easy to do with the terrible movement, you risk falling all the way down to the bottom. To make matters worse, you're on a timer and you have to get between pools before your water meter runs out or you die. And there's no checkpoints. I don't think I got hit in the first level because it was here where I realized I also despised the health system. It's basically like the Sonic games, except instead of rings, it's these golden spatulas. And maybe it's just a skill issue, but that is one of the reasons I could never get into Sonic. Combine this with the cheat mechanics and this game just becomes unbelievably frustrating. The absolute chaos only gets worse extremely fast. Like, what am I supposed to do here? At the end of this fourth stage, we go against the first boss. This isn't too difficult. You have to use the jellyfishing net to chuck jellyfish at the bigger one. It's kind of hard not to get hit due to the limited throw distance, but it's easy enough to recollect your dropped spatulas to stay alive. After beating this, we end up having a short cutscene before moving on to the second world. I think I completely blacked out here. Some of these levels weren't too bad and were pretty short and easy to brute force through. Other levels, not so much. Some of these levels are so long with all of these winding paths and everything looks the same, so it's difficult trying to figure out where you're at. We also get introduced to the reef blower, which is really annoying to use and also makes SpongeBob feel heavier, resulting in even clunkier movement. This was just torture. I had to do an escort mission for Gary within this level, or at least I thought I had to, but was just awarded an extra life for something I spent 3 lives trying to do. I almost rage quit mid-level, but once I finally beat it, I decided to continue on a bit longer. Continuing on, I made it to the last stage of the chapter where I'm faced with the second boss of the game. Here we have to grab this jellyfish gun in the middle of the arena and shoot it at this robot shark thing. While we're doing this though, we also have to make sure we're not getting hit by the shark, or his bombs, or falling into the pit that his bombs open up. Pretty much every one of my deaths was due to trying to jump these small gaps, but accidentally butt slamming into them instead. I eventually exhausted all of my lives, and then I decided to rage quit.
I just don't understand what the developers were trying to do with this game. Did they want kids to have fun or to be depressed?
While this isn't the worst game in existence, it made me angry, so I'm putting it in D tier.
Well, that's it. We've ranked 7 Nickelodeon games and not a single S tier. While that is a bit disappointing, Wait, what? There's one more game? Oh, fuck. Barnyard.
That's right. Does anybody remember this movie? Not to spoil a 20-year-old movie, but that shit was depressing. They eventually turned it into its own spin-off animated show, but before that, in 2006, they made it into a game. I've never even heard of this game until like a few months ago when I was planning this video, so let's see what it's all about. Upon starting the game, we're given a short cutscene of us being shipped into the barnyard, and holy shit, there's a character creator. I choose the female cow because, I mean, god damn, check out those udders. I select the Beefmaster breed, obviously, and name my cow Plongus. After that, we're introduced to the game. I talk to the mule, who gives us a rundown of the basics, and walk over to the pig to get my first quest. Here, he has us collect recipes and ingredients to cook food. Is this game Stardew Valley? Was this game actually ahead of its time? It's still too early to form an opinion, so I continue doing quests for the farm animals. I acquire some sunglasses, which let me... A couple of the quests have us playing some creative mini-games that are actually kind of fun, like this pipe game and... After proving my squirting skills, I get a key that lets me use this bike and another one that lets me open the gate to go out into the open world. And holy cow, is this map massive. I had a mission to go do something in another area, and I got lost just exploring and collecting recipes. I eventually made my way back to complete the mission and returned to the barn to do our first nighttime mission. This introduces us to the shop where we can finally spend the coins we've been collecting, and you can even buy games that you can actually play. I think I actually like this game. I continued doing missions and eventually got to Chapter 2. The mini-games in this game are so varied, and I love the fact that on the surface they're pretty easy, but if you want to master them and get star rank, some of them are actually kind of difficult. I threw chickens, battled raccoons, and squirted cans. I collected a bunch of coins through these gold rush boxes, exploring and cooking recipes so that I could buy more decorations and games for my barn. And eventually, I wrapped it up with a nice competitive game of darts. This game is honestly way more enjoyable than I would have ever expected, and the only reason I stopped where I did is because I was wasting my entire night having too much fun. So you know what? Fuck it, this one gets S tier.
So there we have it. We've ranked 8 Nickelodeon games that more or less went under the radar. I think the moral of the story is that, for the most part, things go unnoticed because they suck.
But for every 7 unknown stinkers, there's always that one underrated gem. Anyways, this video was a lot of work, so I'm going to go take a well-deserved nap. After I beat this game.